Welcome to this bite-sized webinar series. My name is Kerry Hammick and I'm a consultant with the Compliance People, and today I'll be talking you through waste transfer notes in Northern Ireland. So today we will be covering what waste transfer notes are and why we need them, the information required on a waste transfer note, how to correctly complete a waste transfer note, and what annual waste transfer notes are and the required information within them. So we will start with the basics. Waste transfer notes are required for all transfers of non-hazardous waste to another party or site. They may also be called a waste information note, a waste note, or waste paperwork. In my experience, when people talk about a waste ticket, this isn't usually the same thing, as it doesn't have all of the required information on it. It's usually just a ticket to say that they took the waste away, sort of like a delivery note. Article 5 of the Waste and Contaminated Land Northern Ireland Order 1997 imposes the duty of care for controlled waste that requires all producers, carriers and managers of waste to keep records and use waste transfer notes when moving waste around. This applies to all parties in the waste chain. When we refer to controlled waste, that's all household, commercial and industrial waste. Waste transfer notes also allow the regulator to understand what waste are being generated and how they are being disposed of or recovered. The regulator in Northern Ireland is the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. Waste transfer notes also provide a clear paper trail from when the waste was produced to when it is being disposed of, so cradle to grave. They are a legal requirement and must contain all of the required information. It isn't a legal requirement, however, to have all this information completed on an actual waste transfer note, so long as the required information is documented somewhere. However, it's often simplest to do this using a waste transfer note to ensure that all the information is included, and this can be in a paper or electronic format, and we'll go through the required information in the next slides. You only need to have a waste transfer note where waste is being transferred to another party or site. So if you're transferring waste within the same company on the same site, so perhaps your own site, then you don't need one. So what is non-hazardous waste? Well, waste is considered to be non-hazardous when it doesn't cause harm directly to people and the environment. For example, paper, wood, or plastic. Essentially, it means that the waste does not contain any hazardous properties. That is not to say it can't be damaging if stored or treated in the wrong manner. For example, if food waste was left to leach and attract flies. However, the food waste itself is not inherently hazardous. So what are the requirements on a waste transfer note? The law is very specific about what waste transfer notes must contain, so it's very important that nothing is missed. Also, external auditors love checking this sort of thing, so it's very important that we get it right. So firstly, we need a description of the waste. We need any processes the waste have been through, how the waste is contained and or packaged, the quantity of the waste, so the weight, the place and the date of the transfer, so when the waste was moved. We need details of the permit, license or exemption of the person receiving the waste. We need the license or registration number of the person handing over the waste, if they have a waste management license or a registered carrier of controlled waste. We need the appropriate European Waste Catalogue code, and we'll go through these in more detail later on. We need the standard industry code, the SIC code of your business. Again, we'll touch on these a bit later on. And we also need a statement that the waste hierarchy has been applied. We're going to go over these in more detail later on. I appreciate it's quite a comprehensive list. On this slide, we have a template of a waste transfer note as set out by the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. And this is just one way that you can set out your waste transfer note. You'll see many different versions of this, and as long as all the required information is on there, then that's fine. So there's 7 parts, A to G, but you'll only use section G if it's going straight to landfill. You can use different formats as long as all the information required is in there, and you must correctly classify the waste. And you can do this by using technical guidance WM3, which we'll explain in more detail later on. And all waste transfer notes must be retained for a minimum of 2 years. So we'll start with section A, which is about describing the waste. So we need to describe what it is, where it's come from so we can clearly identify it. So we need to know what the waste is, so describe it. Is it paper, card, wood or metal? How is the waste contained? So is it in a skip? Is it loose? Is it in a sack or sacks? How much waste is there? Where was it produced and where was it collected from? We need the European Waste Catalogue code, so this is the EWC code, also sometimes known as the List of Waste code, and we'll explain these a bit later on. And we also need to know what some of the common codes are for our sites so that we can correctly categorise it. And to do this, we can use the websites on the slide below. However, it's better to use the full list in the technical guidance document WM3, as this ensures that you're accurately describing your waste. However, if you have some waste types that you generate on a regular basis, then you can use this website as it has some of the common codes there and it's a bit easier to use. So this is what the WM3 technical guidance document looks like, and the document provides guidance on waste classification. So it's a comprehensive reference manual for anybody that's involved in producing, managing or regulating waste. Appendix A is the key section, as this includes the waste classification codes, also referred to as the List of Waste codes or EWC, European Waste Catalogue codes, and this is for hazardous and non-hazardous waste. It doesn't provide guidance on the packaging and labelling of waste for transport. Just to warn you, it's a very long document. It's 185 pages long. So the key bit you need for identifying waste, as I said before, and getting the right waste codes is Appendix A. It can be quite complicated to use, as there's a particular way you should read it and an order in which to check the chapters in Appendix A. However, this is beyond the scope of the training today. You just need to know where the most common waste codes are for your site and check that they're correct. So how do we identify waste codes? Well, a waste code is a 6-digit code, and the List of Wastes and the EWC catalogue contains 20 chapters that relate either to a process that generated the waste or to a specific waste type. And the wastes are listed according to the industrial process or business activity that created them. The chapters are given a 2-digit number, so for example, 03, waste from wood processing and the production of panels and furniture, pulp, paper and cardboard, or chapter 20, which is municipal wastes, and this is household waste and similar commercial, industrial, institutional waste, including separately collected fractions, and this one would be most likely to be used within your business, as you'll be creating some of the waste within this chapter, as will be chapter 15, potentially waste packaging, absorbents, wiping cloths, filter materials and protective clothing not otherwise specified. So it's really important that you get the right code when you're classifying your waste. An asterisk by a code means it's hazardous, so we don't need these when we're dealing with non-hazardous waste as we are with waste transfer notes. The next section of the waste transfer note is section B, and this is to do with the current holder of the waste or the transferer. So the transferer is the current holder of the waste, which is usually the producer. So when you're giving your waste to somebody else. And section B basically provides information of where the waste has come from and any authorizations in place. It identifies who the producer of the waste is, as a waste may be handled more than one company before it's disposed of. So in this section, we need the name and address of the transferer, the current holder of the waste. We need to identify if this is the producer of the waste. We need to state if the transferer holds an environmental permit or exemption and/or a waste carrier's registration. And we also need the SIC code, so the Standard Industrial Classification Code. So when we talk about SIC codes, what do we actually mean? Well, SIC, S-I-C, stands for Standard Industry or Industrial Classification. And it's a 4-digit code. And SIC codes are used as a system of classifying industries for financial and business administration. So, for example, the SIC code for a manufacturer of paper and paperboard would be 1712. However, you may see it written as 17.12 and this is the old way of doing it, and it's not a big deal if that's not correct. We need to make sure that it's on every waste transfer note where required and that it's correct, and this is a common mistake that we quite often see when we're auditing waste transfer notes. You can check your SIC code on Companies House in the link on this slide, and also if you search for your company on Companies House, it will list the correct SIC code. On the standard waste transfer note, This information is required in Part B, as we've just discussed. We'll move on to section C now, and this section is all about the person collecting the waste, often known as the transferee. So in this section, we need the name and address of the person collecting the waste, the transferee. We need to state if they're a holder, importer, carrier, broker, or dealer of waste. We need to state if they hold a waste authorization and the issuer, so who issued it and is it a permit or an exemption, if applicable. The waste carrier's registration number, so the authorization for them collecting the waste. And it's really important that we've got this, as the person who collects the waste must have a waste carrier's registration, and it must be in date. The next section of the waste transfer note is section D, and this bit is just the waste hierarchy declaration. So in this section, you just need to tick to confirm that you've applied the waste hierarchy, or if you haven't, give an explanation as to why that is the case. So you might be asking, well, what is the waste hierarchy? And we'll explain this in the next slide. Adhering to the waste hierarchy is required by Regulation 17 of the Waste Regulations Northern Ireland 2011. So it was introduced by the Waste Framework Directive, and it identifies 5 steps for dealing with waste in order of priority, which you can see in the triangle on the slide. So you should start with prevention. The next best thing is preparing for reuse. The next best thing is recycling. The next best is energy, so recovery. And then the final option is disposal. It shows the order of priority you should apply when making decisions about the resources used and the waste generated by your business or organisation. And it takes account of the environmental impact of the various waste management operations. Applying the waste hierarchy is also a requirement if you have an environmental permit. So an example of where the waste hierarchy would not have been applied is if a company, say, threw all their waste into the same skip without any segregation. It hasn't been applied here, as you're not preparing for reuse or recycling. You're just sending it straight to landfill altogether. So on the waste transfer note, as we've just seen in the previous section, you need to tick the box to say that you've confirmed that you've complied with the waste hierarchy, and all parties in the chain must apply the waste hierarchy. Section E of the waste transfer note is all about the transfer. So when we say transfer, this is the movement of the waste, so when the waste leaves your site. In this section, you need to have the address of the transfer and collection point, the times and dates of the transfer or transfers if applicable, and it must be clear in this section if a broker or dealer arranged the transfer for you, and if so, you need to give their name, address and appropriate registration details. Section F is for the signatures, so both parties must sign the waste transfer note, so that's the transferor and the transferee, and this is to confirm that they've checked the information is true and correct, so that everything that's contained within the waste transfer note, to the best of their knowledge, is accurate. The final section of the waste transfer note is section G, and this is the Pretreatment Declaration, and this is only completed if the waste is being delivered to landfill. So you must tick which materials have been segregated from the waste, for example, paper or metal. You must put the percentage of the total original volume removed, and you must also state the processes to segregate and/or treat the waste. The Landfill Directive defines treatment as physical, thermal, chemical or biological processes, including sorting, that change the characteristics of waste in order to reduce its volume or hazardous nature or facilitate its handling or enhance recovery. So waste destined for landfill should be treated unless it's inert waste for which treatment is not technically feasible, or it's waste other than inert waste and treatment would not reduce its quantity or the hazards which it poses to human health or the environment. So to recap then, we will go over the key requirements of the waste transfer note. So this is the template provided by the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and as we've mentioned, it's best to use this one as it covers everything you need. So it's a bit more difficult if you use a different type of waste transfer note or a different form, because you need to be a bit more vigilant and check that everything is on there. So we need to make sure in section A we've got the waste description, the EWC codes and the quantity and container type. Section B is about the waste producer, So we need the producer company name and the address, and this can sometimes be the head office if appropriate. And we also need the SIC code, and we need to include whether it's a waste carrier, broker or dealer and their number if applicable. In section C, we need to put the waste carrier name, address and their registration number. This is all about the person who's receiving the waste or the company. Section D is ticking to say that you've complied or adhered to the waste hierarchy, or if you haven't, then why you haven't and how you've departed from it. The next section, section E, is the transfer site name and address, and this can be the same as in section B unless the site location is different. So this section is where the waste is collected. And then section F is the waste transferor and the contractor or carrier signatures. So the waste producer and the person collecting the waste carrier, need to sign these sections. Section G isn't on the slide, as this is just for if waste is going directly to landfill, and we've gone over that in previous slides. So you might sometimes hear people refer to annual waste transfer notes, or your company might already have them in place. It's sometimes called a season ticket, and these are essentially a single waste transfer note that covers a series of non-hazardous waste transfer notes, and they can last for up to a year and be used to regular transfers of the same type of non-hazardous waste with the same waste carrier. If you have several sites serviced by the same carrier with the same types of waste collected, then they can be listed in a schedule to the season ticket. You should always keep a record of the collection times and quantity of waste, and a good way to do this is to get a delivery ticket from the carrier for each load collected, stating when the collection took place and what waste and how much of it was collected. This is for your records, so that if the regulator comes to you and asks where your waste has gone, you have an accurate record of that. You need to still retain this for 2 years, so all waste transfer notes must be retained for a minimum of 2 years. And on the annual transfer note, it needs to be really clear which dates that waste transfer note runs between. In summary then, the waste producer's obligation apply right up to the point of disposal. So you need to make sure that your waste is being collected by the appropriate people and going to the appropriate place. You must use a registered waste carrier, and their registration must be in date. You must check that waste is taken to a permitted site where possible. So you can do this by asking your waste contractor where your waste is going, and this fulfills your duty of care requirement. You must keep proof of the above and the waste transfer note, which details the waste description, EWC codes, the producer, carrier, and deposit recovery waste site details where applicable. So if it's going to a landfill, the producer's SIC code, 2 signatures, and acknowledgement of the waste hierarchy. And all transfer notes must be kept for a minimum of 2 years. Thank you very much for watching this webinar. I hope you found it useful. The Compliance People is the UK's leading provider of environment and health and safety compliance management services, and we've got lots more resources and guidance available, and you can find these if you head over to our website, thecompliancepeople.co.uk. Thank you again for listening.